Hey Flock, Mike here from Epic Duck Studios, and welcome to Just Paint the Base. Today I'm going to be doing two deep ocean bases for Gilblins from Relic Blade. These are literally fish goblins, and I'm doing 20mm bases because they're small dudes. I'm going to be starting with some P3 Eldritch and some P3 Ashith Grey, and mixing some midtones of these two colors to just get some different deep water effects. You'll see what I mean as I keep going. I'm going to start with a roughly 50-50 mix of the two colors here and use this as a base coat. Basically, I want a deep, dark, watery tone, and that's why I'm bringing the Ashith Grey into the Eldritch to both desaturate it and make it darker at the same time. Now, the base coat is really straightforward. I'm probably going to lay down 2-3 coats just to make sure I get good coverage, but I'm going to blow right past that because you know what a base coat is. Now next up I'm going to bring out a lighter gray, in this case P3's Iron Hull Gray, which is roughly a good mid-tone to light side gray here. I'm going to mix that into the color I've already mixed to get a lighter variant of it. And I'm basically going to add some striping to the base. What I want to do is I want sort of a bit of a really subtle wave pattern. So I'm starting with pretty solid blocks to color, but then I'll feather this out with a little bit of smudging, a little bit of dry brushing. Whatever your preferred technique is for kind of blending two paints together, you'll see me kind of put those into play here, just to smooth the transitions between these sort of marbled, brighter, and darker spots. So you can see what I've basically done is I've created alternating bands of light and dark, and this is pretty straightforward. It's also kind of reminiscent of my comic style or cel-shaded style painting, but that's not how this is going to go. That's just a kind of a coincidence. So next up I'm going to use just a little piece of sponge and my tweezers, and I just ripped the sponge off from inside a blister pack, and I want the ripped edge on the outside, so I've kind of folded that away from the tweezers so that the most jagged side is facing outward. And you can see I'm just blotting in a little bit of the darker side of my mixed color and using that to just, buff the edges of those transitions so that they become a nice smooth transition with a really minimal amount of work. Now using the same sponge, I'm going to go in with some pure P3 Eldritch. That's the brightest color we've had out so far. Blot most of it away on some cardboard, and I'm using this to just add some mottled, unpredictability to the sort of base layer we're building up here. It's not meant to be a full layer itself. It's just adding little bits and dots of color to kind of give the idea that the water's not really perfectly smooth. There's some churning happening, right? Now I'm on to the fun part. I've come back in with a brush instead of a sponge, and I'm using straight P3 Eldritch again. And what I'm doing is I'm painting just a series of kind of meandering lines. They don't really have any specific direction or focus. They just kind of go a certain distance and then branch off of each other and make the lines a little bit thicker where they meet. The idea is this is sort of the ripples in the surface of the water reflecting light down. And those have just really kind of random movements, random flow, and they just, because light sort of gathers where they intersect, you want to make the intersections just a little bit thicker, a little bit heavier. And I'm doing this with the P3 Eldritch across the whole surface, whether it's the darker parts or the lighter parts. See here, I start to add some smaller little lines that kind of move away and come right back in again, sort of. What these sort of do is they let the line travel in the same direction, but kind of break apart a little bit, scatter the light somewhat, and it just makes the base more visually interesting. So what you're seeing now is I'm going back to the areas where the lines were either a little bit thin or where they connect together, and building a little more color up, and maybe adding a few more of those meandering sort of parallel or semi-parallel lines. And here I'm just going to repeat the whole process on the second base. So you can see it's just sort of wavy lines that break apart, come back together, have little offshoots, they merge back in. It's a very fluid, kind of free-form style of painting, and it's just a lot of fun to do this. And so here I'm just embellishing those same lines on the second base, same way I did with the first one, adding, extra little meandering bits, thickening it up a little bit where the lines intersect. And I just keep on going, adding more of this layer of detail until I'm happy with it. You can see as I continue to build this up, we get away from the idea of just a couple simple meandering lines, and there's really actually a lot of texture being developed, and that's kind of the key here. We want the idea that water is really complex, and there's a lot of things happening with both the water surface itself and the light that it's scattering, and we're trying to capture that in a simple, fun kind of way. So next I'm going to be using some P3 Menoth White Highlight, which is just a little bit of a yellowish off-white, and I mixed just a tiny amount of that into the Eldritch. I want to just make a slightly lighter version of Eldritch. I didn't want to go, with a white highlight at this point. And so when you're doing this yourself, err on the side of not using enough Menoth White Highlight as opposed to, overbearing your highlight here. And you can see I'm just doing little tiny extra strokes where my line work ended up either to intersect with each other, I've got like a bit of a thicker clump, or where the lines are just a little bit thicker. And the idea is that's where light is gathering a little bit more because of how the reflections work through the, the surface of the waves. So we're just building up these areas where, for whatever reason, light's gathered a little more in concentration. Now, the reason I went with Menoth White Highlight as opposed to a pure white is that I wanted to start to slant the color just a little bit away from blue. I wanted something a little bit more greenish, just because that's the feel of the deep ocean I'm going for here. Now here I've actually taken a step back. I've added a little bit of Eldritch back into the mix, so it's even less bright than my, very cautious highlight already was. And I'm using this to just kind of feather around the edges of the highlights I've made, so they're just a little bit softer. They're not just sharp white lines that happen to drop in the middle of the wave, but they've got a little more of a natural flow to them. Now, the very last thing to do here is, of course, put the models on the bases. Both of these models, I've already added brass pins to their feet, so it's going to be pretty straightforward. Just pulling them off of their painting corks, cutting the pins down a little bit, and chipping away the super glue that's going to be left underneath the foot, because when you glue a model to a pin like this, you're going to get a little tiny crust of super glue, and that's going to stop them from sitting properly. So I'm going to just cut that away, find out where I want to drill. This drill bit is size matched to the brass rod, so it's a perfect, easy fit. Drill that 1mm hole I'm using here, add a little bit of glue back to the brass rod, and a little bit where the model's foot, or in this case his tail, makes contact with the base, and just push it in, make it fit, and let it set. Now, these are one-piece metal models, so you can push on them pretty hard. If you have a multi-piece metal model, you want to make sure you're not putting pressure on an arm or some other outstretched limb that might either bend or be a separate piece that can break off. And with that, I've got two Relic Blade Gilblins on their deep ocean floor bases. These bases are perfect for the deep faction for Relic Blade, but I'm sure you can find lots of other places to use these, like the Igneth Deepkin from Age of Sigmar, or the Tritons from Monsterpocalypse. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, do something epic.
Hey, thanks for watching my video. If you enjoyed that one, please hit like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell so you get notifications when I post new videos in the future. If you want to take your support even further, you can do that at patreon.com/epicduck. Every little bit helps keep the lights on and the paint flowing, puts new models on the table so I can make interesting videos, and most importantly, puts a roof over my family's head and food on the table. You can also join me for live painting shows several times a week at twitch.tv/epicduckstudios. I'd love if you came by and watched the show sometime and followed the channel. I want to give a big thank you to everyone who's supported my content over the years, both past and present. It's been an absolutely wild ride, and I couldn't do this without all the wonderful fans and flockers out there. The hobby community is just an amazing group of people, and you really make this worth doing. So let's just keep on doing this together, making more content, and just being fantastic together for years to come. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, do something epic.